Hello, everybody. Today is December the 6th, 2020, and you are here with the first episode of the Magic Dog Podcast. The current time is 12:56, and I will be your host, Dalio. I want to thank my friend Davey Xylophone for letting me use his equipment. He let me borrow his mic, mixer, and other gear, and I'm sure I have it mixed pretty poorly, but I'll learn as I go, so strap on in. I'm ready to go. Got something to talk about. It's got me a little hot and bothered. Something I've been thinking about recently, a lot of recently, and that's levels. Levels for tabletop role-playing games. I think they're outdated. I think they're old, they're crude, and they're outdated. I don't think there's any place in modern tabletop gaming for levels anymore. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What are levels? What is experience? We have to cover both of these things before we fully understand the concept of levels and experience. So, what is experience exactly? Experience is the culmination of knowledge, skills, training, wisdom that a character has gained over the course of a game, over a campaign, over a scenario. Experience is typically earned many different ways. In traditional OD&D, experience was only ever earned through defeating enemies and collecting treasure. But with more modern versions of tabletop games, experience is gained through good role-playing, completing quests, completing chapters, finishing dungeons, talking to the right people. Experience can be gained a multitude of different ways, especially in modules. Modules will even point out where experience can be gained for certain things. In a lot of modern role-playing games, experience is used to increase skills, abilities, to raise up feats, etc. In the Roll-Only 2 system, my system, which is coming out for Machina and Magic, experience is spent to increase skills and increase abilities and learn feats, etc. But in Dungeons & Dragons, and many games that use the System 20, experience allows you to level. When enough experience is gained, you level up. You gain another level. Traditionally, you start at a very low level, say level 1, and when you gain a specific amount of experience points, let's say 1,000, you gain a level. When you gain a level, you get a whole package deal of things equal to typically your class. You get a whole package deal of goodies that raise with you. These are things like hit points. These are things like attack bonuses for attack rolls, sometimes damage, sometimes you get full abilities, sometimes you get to pick between feats. Since subclasses have become extremely popular amongst games like Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons, you will get a variety of different abilities based off your subclass. And these things sort of just, boom, you gain the level, you gain the things. And to me, it seems extremely strange. I've always found it sort of strange that you just gain a lump sum of things, boom, within a level. Now, traditionally, and this is from pretty much OD&D on, you would have something known as downtime. And what downtime is that your character would be no longer exploring dungeons, no longer doing any major quest, and they would be somewhere safe, or like in town, or in their manor, or wherever they might be, their base, or if they're a druid, just outside, and they would just take this time to hone their skills and abilities even further, which does make sense. Like, if you had an allotted amount of time to become stronger in your abilities, then yeah, of course you would learn a lot of these different things. But it's sort of strange because typically if you're stuck in a class, you would learn whatever the class provided. And if we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, or for example 5e, where you do get to pick a subclass, there's some customization involved. And with 5e, you would, every time you get a ability raised, you could get yourself a feat. And if it was 3.5, you would have feats at specific levels based off your class, so you'd have some more customization. Having this sort of downtime mechanic gives players sort of an excuse to min-max a character in a story sort of way, because well, they want their characters to be particularly good at certain abilities. And now, since they have downtime, they can learn, hone, and research those abilities of their own time and their own accord. Versus possibly in a more recent, more modern role-playing game where experience is spent to learn abilities either after a chapter or after a session or during a relatively smaller downtime. You would learn things as you go and as you progress. The game master would say, yes, you qualify to raise a skill, you spend the experience, and then you raise your skill as you go. Whereas I have said, with a level, everything is lump summed. Everything is gained at once. Hit points are one of the strangest things that D&D has. And hit points are one of those things that I feel like Dungeons & Dragons has altered in their mind to justify why they exist and why they do what they do. Because it's extremely strange that if you do not become more physically fit, that you're able to take more damage. But also, apparently, hit points don't really represent health, but also represent near blows and represent plot armor. And I want to know what makes these sort of things trainable in downtime. I want to know how you train hit points. Well, I can think of ways to train hit points. You eat better, you get healthier, you get stronger, you get more endurance. You can build up a healthiness to yourself. Your body can become more resilient, and you can become stronger. But apparently, all classes in traditional D&D gain hit points somehow. Somehow, this is something that's trained in downtime that you magically get. But once again, since hit points don't really just represent health, then how is this trained? I'm a little confused. I have questions. How is hit points trained? What about toughness? I pick up the feat toughness and I gain more hit points. Like, how is this trained? I mean, I can justify it in downtime. I could make reasons for it, but why is the wizard also gaining hit points? What is the wizard doing? He has all of this time that he has to research spells, so he has spells for spell slots. When does he have time to increase his hit points? I can justify his attack bonus, because despite the fact that he himself may not be good at fighting like the fighter, he's at least been through enough combat and battle to understand watching what the fighter does, watching what the other characters do, and even having some close calls himself. So it completely makes sense as to why the wizard would gain an attack bonus. But let's say that the DM has never thrown around any creatures that do mental attacks. Why is the wizard gaining more in his will save? Or is that something that the wizard practices in his downtime? Like, perhaps there are mental exercises that can be done that help the wizard retain mental focus and resist mental intrusion. But why can't the fighter learn that in his spare time? Okay, you could say it's a class thing, and will save is something that's kind of part of that class skill tree of knowledges that you have access to, etc., etc. But you have to jump through hoops to make downtime and levels work, because you have to sort of explain things that are going on during your downtime to justify why you got what you got. And I know that DMs aren't using downtime, they're not doing it. I played Curse of Strahd with some friends of ours, and it was a very fast-paced game. Time was of the essence. We didn't have time for downtime. So how does a person level in an area that's too dangerous for downtime? How do you level up? How does this work? You have to jump through some hoops to justify downtime in Curse of Strahd. There's so much stuff going on in Curse of Strahd that you don't have time for downtime. There's just there's no downtime to be had. So, I mean, maybe DMs run it differently, but Strahd's always watching you, and Strahd will make his moves. If it makes sense to the DM, Strahd will make his moves. So you have to stick together. The world of Barovia is dangerous. You have time for downtime. You don't. So you level up, you gain a whole bunch of things as a lump sum. It doesn't make any sense. So without downtime, levels don't work. But if you're running a story that's sort of time is of the essence, that epic tale of get the ring into the volcano, you don't have time for downtime to level. So due to the classic nature of the beast, you can do things one of two ways. Either you design a story that allows for downtime, or you don't. And you let levels happen as they do, and it's weird. Whereas with a more modern sort of setup, you can expend experience as you go, and if you have modern moments of downtime to re-hone skills, or if your character can hone their skills naturally over the course of a campaign, just by actually fighting monsters to raise your melee skill, or to actively be climbing a lot in the terrain to raise your climb skill. These are sort of natural progressions through experience. You gain the experience, you spend the experience based off things that are happening in the campaign as is, and you don't require nearly as much downtime. And that's why I think levels are a little outdated. They're a little confined, and they don't make much sense without the downtime aspect. And it's not to say that games with levels are bad, because they're definitely not. But it's definitely a very old school idea that I think that a lot of modern games have moved away from for good reasons. I think there's very good reasons why modern role-playing games no longer use levels. And D&D 5e decided to maintain levels, and Pathfinder 2nd Edition decided to remain with levels. And they will probably remain the games that have levels, but as for any modern tabletop role-playing game, you're not going to see levels. I think it would be more interesting to see more games with levels. Maybe if the level caps weren't designed like the classic games were. In classic games, or in traditional, well, this is where things get a little confusing, because in traditional OD&D, it was sort of recommended that somewhere between level 10 and level 15, you would decide to retire your characters. You've made it in the world, you got big, you're the big boy now, you're probably an earl, or a baron, or in the case of Barovia, you're a burgermaster. And you've made it. You've made it to the pinnacle, and your character probably, because a lot of DMs do this, and I do this, your characters come back, as powerful and useful NPCs, and, the story continues with them in the background, with them out of the spotlight, per se. But it's sort of changed. It sort of changed probably around 3.5, maybe even AD&D. I mean, I didn't live in that moment per se with AD&D, but in 3.5, level 20 was the epic level. So, and I've never run a campaign to 20. I've never run a campaign to 20. 15 naturally always seemed to progress where things ended, because especially with Magic at level 15, you're already pretty powerful. That's one thing I can give levels credit, is that levels are very good for gauging power. You understand how powerful a person is with a number attached to a level. Level 5, you're doing pretty good. Level 10, you're pretty darn strong. Level 15, we don't mess. We don't mess with those people. Level 15 people can really screw things up. Cities are in trouble at level 15. But also due to the strangeness of the power creep and how powerful beings can be at level 15, it all sort of becomes weird with the dynamic of Dungeons and Dragons, because, well, if you're level 15, what level is the king? ? Does he also have a level 15 person under his vassalage? And what's all these extremely powerful people doing about that can, hurt the world, like at a very dramatic level? Like, there's spells that you can screw with the weather and cause earthquakes, and summon fireballs that can sweep through city streets. Like, 15 is not to mess with, and 20 is even more terrifying. So it's like, how many of these people actually exist at these specific levels? And some people play traditionally that a town guard is only at level 1 or level 0. I've always treated town guards as level 3, anywhere between level 2 to level 4. You know, if they're the captain of the guard, they might be 4 or 5, and if they're just a nobody night watch, they might just be a 2. But you can't just leave them at level 1, otherwise they're not a threat. Because to me that doesn't make any sense. Like, so they can't be a threat at level 1. And once you're at level 5, you can wipe the floor with all the guards if they're level 0 or level 1. So you got to create some sort of threat. Which comes round robin with hit points, because the higher level you are, the more hit points you have. So, of course, guards have less or more hit points based off their level of skill and training, etc. Before I get too carried away with levels, I need to talk about one more method in which skills and abilities are learned. And it would be a shame if I didn't mention this format of gaining skills and ability, and that's the free-form approach. The free-form approach is where skills and abilities are learned over time versus spending experience or gaining abilities through levels. This is typically governed by the game master. So the game master would say, okay, over the course of 6 weeks, you were able to gain a working proficiency in a language because you took the time to study the language and you had somebody to practice with. And the game master might make it easier for you to learn if you have a good teacher, or harder to learn if you're investigating stuff on your own. And this sort of free-form approach allows for endless possibilities. You're not really limited by any sort of experience system behind you. But at the same time, because there's no structure, it's not necessarily a great thing for players, because players require some sort of structure, some sort of grounding, and experience provides that. They know that when they gain this much experience, that they will level up and they will gain these abilities. For any other system that uses experience points to spend on abilities and skills over the course of time, yeah, typically most games require that the game master approve of any skills or abilities that are taken and purchased with experience points. So there is some sort of level of referee that a game master gets to be towards purchasing skills and abilities, because obviously if a character had never practiced a specific skill or never practiced a specific ability, it wouldn't make sense for them to learn it. But at least the players understand how much experience they have, how much experience it costs for specific abilities, and they understand that, well, they have to use abilities to gain abilities, and if they have downtime, they can use that downtime to learn these abilities just fine, just like any other normal downtime. There's at least some form of grounding through experience points that a free-form system doesn't really truly provide. And I have seen with OD&D this free-form approach applied, because skills and abilities aren't necessarily defined in OD&D. You have your attack rolls and you have your spells for spellcasters, but a lot of skills and abilities don't truly exist. They're sort of free form in nature, and they're things you have to either acquire through your backstory or you learn them over the course of the game. And with OD&D, with that approach, there's some good to it, but once again, because it's not grounded, it's hard for players to fully understand what they're capable of, what they have learned. If you have a skill system with a numeric value like later versions of D&D, you have an idea that 5 ranks in lockpicking is useful but not necessarily great. Once you start hitting about 15 ranks in lockpicking, you're starting to pick most complicated locks. So there's a level of grounding that sort of has to exist for players. So freeform has its ups and its downs, and it works differently in different systems. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to my very first podcast. I hope to do more of these, and this is sort of a practice round for me. Thank you, and stay tuned, because the Machina and Magic tabletop game will be coming out relatively soon, and I'm excited, and I'm working extremely hard, and hopefully I'll have more topics, and I'll script more things, and we'll have definitely some great conversation pieces. I want to do some videos on gaming philosophy and the like. So you guys have a wonderful night. stay safe during these troubling times, and have a very blessed holiday and the rest of your year.